Glad to welcome Brad White to the conversation this morning. He joins us in studio there in Jackson, Executive Director of the Mississippi Department of Transportation, a man who has served in the political realm for a really long time as Chief of Staff to former Senator Thad Cochran, Chief of Staff to Governor Tate Reeves, and since middle of the summer has been in this role as Director of the Department of Transportation. Does it still feel like you're drinking from a fire hose, Brad? You come into a new job and you go July and August and September, and there's a lot going on.
Well, I've been there about a little over 3 years, and we've got a really good staff, so they make it real easy on me.
So what is the biggest thing that is being tackled by the Department of Transportation right now? There's been a focus on roads and bridges and making them safe, making them passable, in a lot of cases rebuilding and relaying those roads. Where is your focus right now?
Well, starting 3 years ago, we had three main objectives. We had been losing a lot of staff, which was costing the state of Mississippi. I mean, our dependency on engineering consulting firms was greater than ever before. We were spending about $75 million a year on that. Our maintenance forces had dwindled. We went from having maintenance forces in each county to maintenance forces, the same amount of people having to cover multiple counties, so our response time had suffered from that, which was detrimental after a storm, hurricane, tornado, anything like that. And thankfully, working with the personnel board, we've been able to adjust our salaries. We've stopped the hemorrhaging of employees. We've been building back our professional and maintenance forces and trying to give our people a fair wage. So that's been great. More money for projects around the state, getting back to the business that the Department of Transportation is about, which is maintaining the 30,000 plus miles of highway that we have around the state, over 500 bridges. It's about a $66 billion asset that the taxpayers have in their highway system. And being able to maintain that and at the same time restart our capacity construction program, which is the program that tries to add efficiency to the system. If it's a two-lane highway that's got too much traffic on it, it turns it into a four-lane. It builds bypasses. It does things of that nature. That program, due to lack of funding, had been on the shelf basically for over a decade, and we've been able to restart that. So our focus has been primarily on taking care of this asset that the taxpayers have in the way of highways and bridges, and at the same time trying to be a true Department of Transportation and invest in things like public transit, our airports around the state, rail lines around the state, and water ports as well. But the big focus that we've got right now is on the Emergency Road and Bridge Relief Fund.
Right.
This is a fund that was put in place by the legislature after the local bridge crisis that we had in 2017 and 18. The legislature has put, over the last 5 years, over $570 million into this fund that we've been able to put into the counties and municipalities around the state to try to help them get bridges and roadways back up to par and open that allows things like school buses and ambulances and just the motoring public to be able to get around. So that's our focus right now.
Visiting with Brad White, Executive Director at the Mississippi Department of Transportation. I hope you will forgive me. I tried to say 3 years earlier, and I said 3 months. Maybe it feels like 3 months sometimes when you think about 3 years. Certainly, it can go fast and a lot. What about new money? So you talked about the nearly $570 million that the legislature has allocated based on revenues that are coming in. The importance the legislature has put on the Roads and Bridges project through this Emergency Road and Bridge Repair Fund. Do you anticipate that funding continues, giving you the opportunity and your department the opportunity to continue to go forward with the projects that are necessary?
Well, we hope so. And again, the Emergency Road and Bridge Relief Fund is purely for local systems. So it's a whole nother conversation when we get to talking about the funding model that we operate under to take care of the state highways and interstates that we have around the state. And that's probably the biggest need that we have right now, is looking at how do we modernize that funding model to give us the recurring revenue that we need in order to operate. It's been the last time that funding model has been changed in any way was 1987. So I was 10 years old the last time that the legislature adjusted the way that the then highway department was funded. So the thing that we're working with the legislature right now on, that's our number one priority, is how are we going to provide for this core function of government moving into the future? And I think that it's going to take a more diversified approach than what we've normally looked at. Normally we're all funded by the fuel tax that's collected and paid, but 1 cent of fuel tax generates about $23 million, and we're running at about a $485 million a year deficit just in maintenance. That's before you get into the construction program that we were speaking of that adds efficiency. So it's a very important conversation for us to have, and hopefully we can have a meaningful conversation about how to move forward and how to provide for us. But I think it's going to take a diversified approach in order to do that.
And Brad, anytime you use that T word, tax, people's antennas go up, right? I mean, you start looking at, okay, well, should you raise the fuel tax? Should it go? I mean, what was your number? 1 cent generates.
1 cent does about $24 million. But you know, we provided the legislature with opportunities last year, or ideas that they could generate the money to us in a recurring fashion that would not require a fuel tax. Now, it would require living within our budget. It would require them looking at monies that go to the general fund now from the use tax, from gaming revenue, and other sources that they could direct to us. But I think that there's a way to do that without raising taxes on the people. It's just a matter of being responsible with the money that we collect and recognizing that this is a core function of government. We say all the time, excuse me, it doesn't matter how much money we put into public education if the school buses cease to be able to cross the bridges. And it doesn't matter how good your health insurance is if the ambulance gets stuck in traffic on the way to the hospital. So this is one of the few things that I think the taxpayers expect to get back from their government is navigable roads and bridges around the state, being able to get from point A to B. I mean, anytime you talk about economic development, that's the number one thing that these prospects talk about, is how are they going to get not just their employees but their goods to and from their site. Every major plant or major development that the state has had, I mean, the Mississippi Development Authority ends up having to talk with us before any announcement's made for us to be able to look at what investment will the state have to make to bring the infrastructure in that area up to par to be able to adequately service that particular business. So.
And that's interesting because when you talk about infrastructure for a major MDA project, it's not just the infrastructure immediately around that site, right? I mean, we know that roads and curbs and drainage and electricity and all of those things have to happen, but it's in the area surrounding that to be able to get to and from with trucks and equipment that's coming in and out, right?
Right. And the bad thing is due to lack of funding. I mentioned about 12 years ago the commission had to put a moratorium of sorts on these capacity construction projects. And that's the reason that you have the traffic you do on, say, I-55 in DeSoto County or I-20 through Jackson, Vicksburg, areas on the coast. Anytime you get around the state and you're stuck in traffic or you're realizing that the roadway just cannot adequately handle the capacity of motorists on it, the reason we've got that is because for over 10 years the program that is designed to take care of that need was shelved because our primary thing is to protect the current investment the taxpayers have, so all of our money was going into maintenance. And if we don't look at this funding model and figure out how to provide for this core function of government, then that's exactly where we're about to go again, and having to shelf this capacity program. And I don't know that we could recover from another moratorium of sorts put on these types of major projects.
We will continue this conversation with Brad White. He's Executive Director of the Mississippi Department of Transportation. He asked some questions on the C Spire text line that you have asked. We will get to as well, including Brian's question about whether lottery money is going to roads and bridges, and questions about some of the bridges in the county that are getting turned around, I guess counties across the state, and then a specific question about Highway 18 and Brandon. We'll get to those when we come back. Visiting with Brad White. This is the Gallo Show. Richard Cross in for Paul this morning. You're listening to SuperTalk Mississippi just after 7:30 on Monday morning, September 23rd. We're back right after this. Back with you. This is the Gallo Radio Show on SuperTalk, Mississippi on this Monday morning. Thanks for being with us. Visiting with Brad White. He's the Executive Director of the Mississippi Department of Transportation. Appreciate his time this morning. Brad, I was thinking during the break, you're in a position where I'm guessing you don't get just a whole lot of attaboys, maybe a few thank yous, but roads and bridges aren't always the sexiest. But I bet you do get a lot of complaints because when there are passability issues, people want it fixed. They want it fixed now. They don't care what it costs. They don't care where the money comes from. Just get it fixed.
Well, sure, but, I understand that because, our needs far outweigh the resources we have with which to address them. So you're going to have that. And like we were mentioning before the break, the program that is designed to continue adding efficiency to our system and building it out for over 10 years was put on a shelf due to lack of funding. So I recognize that there are areas around the state that people get frustrated because the traffic, in all honesty, just doesn't move quite as well as it could. And that's kind of what we are working with the legislature now on is finding a way to provide for this core function of government so that those types of needs are addressed in a more efficient manner, more quicker than what we do now, and more effectively. The good news is I think that we have a legislature that's very pro-transportation. The Speaker of the House, Jason White, Chairman Trey Lamar and Scott Bounds are working on this tax committee, special committee that the Speaker appointed to look at our tax system around the state. I think transportation funding is one of the major tenets of what that committee is working on and trying to determine a way that we can provide for the needs that we have around the state to do this, because I do think that every other major thing that the state government deals with ultimately comes back to transportation. It doesn't matter if you're talking about our school system. It doesn't matter if you're talking about health care, providing health care. It doesn't matter if you're talking about economic development or community development. It all boils back to this. Before the break, you had mentioned that someone asked about the lottery.
Right.
We get $80 million a year out of the lottery. I think the lottery started to provide the state with like $130, $140 million, but we get the first $80 million. And the commission decided back when that started to put 100% of the $80 million we get on the two-lane highways around the state, because they were being left out in our overall formula that we use in order to maintain highways. And so since the inception of the lottery, I think we've rehabilitated over 3,000 miles of two-lane highway around the state. And in a lot of municipalities, the two-lane highways are the main thoroughfare through town, if you're in New Hebron or Mendenhall or places like that. So it's been a very effective thing, but it sunsets in 3 or 4 years from now. So hopefully we can work with the legislature to remove that sunset so that we can continue getting the $80 million a year and hopefully maybe even more to continue contributing into the highways like that.
Is that a decision that would be made well in advance of the time that it sunsets, or is it something that you kind of have to get up against the deadline before people say, ooh, we got to do something here, what are we going to do?
Well, they could obviously do it anytime they wanted to when they're in session. Oftentimes, I guess, it happens, right before something does sunset a year or two in advance. But
sure.
Hopefully we can see some movement on that in the next session or two.
See if we can do these semi-rapid fire, because lots of people have questions about projects in their communities. I expected to see this one because it's where I live. Somebody said, will Highway 7 in Lafayette County ever be 4-lane? So many wrecks that have happened. Highway 7 South in particular has been a large topic of the conversation for a really long time.
Yeah, and it is one of the major capacity projects that we have in the program now. This last session, the legislature, the last 2 or 3 years, the legislature has contributed one-time money into our capacity construction program, and that's allowed us to start at the top of the list and to tick away projects moving down. this last session they provided enough funds that we believe that we'll be able to pay for the construction of the Highway 7 project that goes from about Highway 9 north up to Highway 6. And I'm very familiar with that area. Senator Cochran's home used to be right off of that, so I can remember trying to turn into his driveway a lot of times with ongoing traffic. But it is one of the ones that we expect to be doing. We're working with the city now on all the pre-construction phases, but hopefully within the next year that we'll have that underway.
I think there was you said within the next year. That's kind of the timeline at this point?
I think so. I mean, don't hold me to that. It may be a few months, it may be, but somewhere in the next year, I think we'll be able to move into the construction phase of that.
I got a question about Highway 18 in Brandon.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that we have anything on the books for that. There is a lot of conversation about that. I know Commissioner Andy Gibson has talked about a development out there that he's interested in and trying to bring, and it's obviously an area that is like other places around the state that is in need of enhancement. I don't know of anything that we have on the books right now that will be bringing forward construction in the near future, but it's certainly a topic of conversation.
Paul and Hernando asked about I-55 north into DeSoto County. He says, don't forget about the northern part of the state.
No, he's exactly right. And first of all, most of the capacity money that we're spending now is in the northern part of the state. Most of the projects that were ready are in North Mississippi and are seeing money being devoted to building those out, Highway 15 over in northeast Mississippi. But 55 in DeSoto County is one of the major areas that we've seen a lot of growth, and it's one of the areas that suffered the most by us not having the funds to maintain this capacity program over the last several years. That whole corridor has been divided into 3 different projects with a totality of over $1 billion for the construction to properly address the needs of that one corridor. We have received enough funds that we expect to move forward with the first phase of that project in DeSoto County. But you know, there's still going to be 2 other phases that we've got to get done. But I mean, just the amount of money that it costs to do this, we're not going to be able to move on those things in the way that people would expect us to without proper funding. You know.
Let me ask you about one more. We get these, and then may try and switch topics just for a second as we wrap things up. Somebody says Highway 6, Clarksdale to Batesville. Will that ever become 4-lane? I recognize that 902 exchange is a Clarksdale number. There's a lot that has gone on that stretch of highway between Batesville and Clarksdale in the last couple of years with redoing some bridges and rerouting part of Highway 6. Does that ever go to 4-lane?
Right, and I think that is something that is in our system to try to look at. But again, it's kind of like what I was saying about Highway 18. It's one of those things that we recognize the need, and we have done some preliminary work. But you know, without proper funding, I don't know how we move all of these into construction. But the good news is that conversation is being had with the appropriate leadership in the legislature, and I believe that thanks to Speaker White, we're going to see some movement made in how we're funded and hopefully get the type of recurring revenue we need to be able to cash flow these projects.
Brad White, Executive Director, Mississippi Department of Transportation. How much does it cost to cut the grass along the roads of Mississippi?
We probably spend several $1 million a year. I mean, you got to think about we've got over 33,000 miles of roadway in the state. So you've got right-of-way on both sides of those, sometimes medians, you know, and all of that in order to maintain. It's not easy. We spend over $3 or $4 million a year just picking up litter. So a lot of our maintenance funds, you know, are absorbed and just trying to maintain not just the roadways itself, but the right-of-ways on the side of it, and try our best to keep them clean.
Is that all handled by MDOT employees, or is that contracted out?
It's a little bit of both. We have our own forces that do some of that, and then we're forced to have to contract a lot of that out in order to get it accomplished. I can tell you it can be real frustrating. I remember not too long ago we had some equipment come in on the near Fortification Street and the Waterworks curve in Jackson, you know, and clean up under the trees, mow all the right-of-way, pick up all the litter, and it looked great. It was clean. I went home. I come back to the office the next day, and somebody had dumped out it seemed like a whole truckload of old tires and things like that. So a lot of our resources goes to trying to keep the roadways as clean as possible, but it seems like sometimes you're fighting a never-ending battle.
Is the Adopt a Highway program, is that still a thing? Mm-hmm. Where local groups will go in and volunteer to clean up a mile or 2 mile stretch of roadway?
It is for certain areas, that you've got businesses that want to do that, and we really appreciate the partnership that we have with them. We have a lot of counties. That's one of the focuses I know that our commissioners work on all the time, is working with local governments to have inmate litter programs where we have county sheriffs and city chiefs of police that are out there doing that. So.
You got time to hang for one more as we wrap up the 7 o'clock hour, or do you need to run?
No, I'm good.
All right, let's hang. We're going to switch gears with Brad White when we come back and talk a little bit about his past life working as chief of staff for senators and president, primarily Senator Cochran and Governor Reeves as well. We'll do that when we come back. This is the Gallo Show on SuperTalk Mississippi, visiting with Brad White from the Mississippi Department of Transportation. Back with you on SuperTalk Mississippi. Richard Cross in for Paul Gallo this morning, wrapping up our conversation with Brad White, Executive Director of the Mississippi Department of Transportation. Very generous with his time this morning. I'm not sure that he signed up for 3 segments, but he's kind enough. I just have so many questions. In a previous point of your career, Chief of Staff for Senator Cochran, worked as Chief of Staff for Governor Reeves, and I think some time with Cindy Hyde-Smith as well. I was reading a story this morning that was talking about the Republican ground game. Sometimes we might describe that as grassroots, as simple as knocking on doors. And there's a lot of concern that maybe that is not as robust as it should be. Has politics changed so much that that's less important than it was literally knocking on doors? Is it only important in a local election? Is it still important with a national election?
I think it's very important. I mean, you look back at probably one of the most robust campaigns Mississippi ever saw was Governor Haley Barbour's election in 2003, and then again his reelect in 2007.
Right.
And that was a major part of what he did. We had a Get Out the Vote program that was devoted to different aspects. You had phone banks, you had direct mail that was hitting at a certain time, and then you had people knocking on doors. And I don't know that I've ever seen it done quite as effectively as what Governor Barbour's campaign did back in 2003, and it resulted in, at the time, the biggest turnout we had ever had in a gubernatorial election. And so I think it's very effective. And most of the time, if the Republican Party in any given election sticks to policy and to the positions that we as a party promote, I mean, we tend to win. And any time we deviate from that, we kind of get our teeth knocked in. So I think the biggest concern I have when I look at our national state of play is just the nastiness that the politics has gotten, and how, in my opinion, for what it's worth, I think we need to return to being a party that communicates to the American people how we can take policy and put that into play to benefit our nation, our state, our local governments. And in my experience, when we've done that effectively, the people give us the opportunity to govern. But no, I think a good ground game is very important. I think back, the only campaign of all the years that I've been involved in politics, the only campaign that I was ever paid to work on was Delbert Hoseman's congressional campaign in 1998. And that was a big part of that campaign as well. And incidentally, when we're talking about all the funding that we've received the last 3 years that I've been at MDOT, I mean, the Lieutenant Governor has been one of the tip of the spears and helping lead the way in trying to provide funding for transportation projects. And without his involvement and leadership, we wouldn't have been able to break ground on all the projects that we've started doing in the last year. But no, I back to your question. I'm sorry, I'm going a long way around the barn.
No,
I tell you, it is very important.
Yeah. When I think of Senator Cochran, I think of one of the great gentlemen that has served in Washington, and there was an ability and I know we're in a different time politically. You alluded to it just a second ago. There was ability to reach across the aisle, and just because you had a D next to your name didn't necessarily mean that you were a terrible person and were incapable of having any reasonable ideas. They figured out a way to work together. You said if we could maybe bring back some civility, and I'm paraphrasing. I'm not using your exact words there. Is there any route to that, Brad?
I think there is.
As you look.
I think there is. I mean, Senator Cochran was one of the finest people. I mean, not just elected officials or leader, but just as an individual. He was one of the finest people that I ever had the opportunity to get to know. I mean, his character was strong. I mean, he treated people the way that he wanted to be treated. He was a wonderful listener. Anybody that came to him, regardless of what side of the aisle they sat on, that had a need, as when he chaired appropriations, when was in charge of all the money, he always heard people out. And he had conviction that he didn't mind telling people no, but he always did it in a way that, as Senator Patrick Leahy, who's a Democrat from Vermont, would say, they would go to the Senate floor and oftentimes vote against one another and speak against one another, but would be able to walk out with their arms around each other in friendship. And Mississippi benefited a lot from us being able to have leaders that had that type of relationship. I mean, go back to Sonny Montgomery. He was a Democrat and was very close friends with President George H. Walker Bush, and that benefited Mississippi as well. So hopefully we'll see a return to that type of governing.
Brad, I think we covered a lot of ground. Really appreciate your time this morning and continued success in the roads and bridges work. I know it's never ending and it's really expensive. We appreciate your leadership there at MDOT.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
Brad White joining us in studio this morning on the Gallo Show, 8 o'clock hour. Coming up next, Richard Cross in for Paul on SuperTalk Mississippi.